And we're back here in Inside the Ropes, and I'm joined by the demo god himself. He's got everything going on, but he has got the Book of Jericho, 30 years of Chris Jericho's wrestling career. I mean, what a project to have. I want to ask you, though, because, I mean, first of all, hello. I'm not even giving you a chance to say hi.
we did all that stuff before.
It's yeah, no.
Yeah, we're
but so you're doing the book, 30 Years of Jericho. The thing I was interested about was, though, was it always the plan for it to be 30 years? Did you ever think a Jericho 25 book? Like, when did you come to the conclusion, okay, all this stuff that I've been writing down, it's going to be a book for this specific time?
Well, it was never even really planned to be a book. It's just something that I've always done. Mm-hmm. I always kept a list of every match that I ever had just because no one else ever did. And I just thought, well, I want to know how many matches I've had, even if nobody else cares. And whether I have one match or 1,000 matches, I want to have them written down. So I started October 2nd, 1990. And I've told the story before, but I literally remember writing this down on the piece of paper that I still have to this day, and kept an entire, collection of all these matches since that day. Uh-huh. So I think basically, probably subtly, I think it's funny because now they're getting ready to do Metallica 40, but Metallica 30, I was there at the theater at the Fillmore in San Francisco for two of those nights. And I remember thinking, this is really cool how they're doing kind of this 30-year celebration, and they're doing it in a way that no one else ever had. They had a lot of guests, friends there, and they had, all of the covers they'd ever done, and, learning songs just for one night that they'd never played before. And I just thought, this is really a cool way to celebrate a 30th anniversary. So I think when I started getting closer to mine, I was like, well, what can I really do to make this special? And what I didn't realize is that Tony Khan had the idea to do the Jericho 30 show on Dynamite. And that's when I kind of started thinking, well, if I'm going to do it, now is probably the time of putting, because long story short is the original idea, I think, for this list of matches was to use it as an appendix for one of my other books. I remember talking about as early as Lion's Tale, like one of the appendices will be every match, which would have been, hundreds of pages. It just didn't work. Mm-hmm. And then I started thinking, well, could I actually do this as a standalone book on its own? And that's kind of where the idea started to germinate, and started to think, how can I make this a really cool kind of almost like a history book and a souvenir, a coffee table book, all of those kind of things, whether you're a Jericho fan or just a wrestling fan, because like I said, it really is more of a history book than anything, just from the time that it covers.
Yeah, I also love the story that you told, if you can tell it quickly, the story of why you started writing stuff down back in Calgary.
Yeah, I mean, it was first day of wrestling school, and it was the Hart Brothers Pro Wrestling Camp, but Keith Hart showed up only on the first day, basically to collect our money, and then we never saw him again. And, it was a little bit nerve-wracking because this is Keith Hart. I saw him on TV, and here we are at wrestling school. And he came in the ring and asked a couple people questions. And I remember I asked him, how many matches have you had? And he said, nobody keeps track of that. That's kind of a stupid question. And then he called me a gearbox, which this day I'm like, that's the worst insult I've ever heard. But point being is that I was thinking about that. Well, if I want to know how many games Wayne Gretzky's played, I can go to a library and look it up in a book. Mm-hmm. So I can't look up how many matches Keith Hart has had. That seemed very strange to me. So let me give people the option and me the option to know how many matches I've had by keeping my own record. So that's kind of where it all started. And that's why the very first night, my first show, October 2nd, 1990, like I said, Ponoka, Alberta in Canada versus Lance Storm. And it was a 10-minute draw. And I can't remember what I gave it, 2.5 stars. And my payoff was $30 and the crowd was, 110 people. So I wrote that down. Mm-hmm. And then every night afterwards, I'd finish my match and write down the information. And then suddenly, one match becomes 10, becomes 100, becomes 200. Then it just becomes a thing that I do to mm-hmm. where, the book has 2,722 matches included in it, from October 2nd, 1990 to October 7th, 2020. And then I started thinking, well, I don't want to just put out a book of just lists, but what else would I do with it? And that's when Alex Marvez and Pete Fornatail, who I worked with on this, started coming with ideas of doing top 10 lists and doing, having some of the biggest stars in wrestling and journalists and people giving their memories of Chris Jericho and the kind of all the information and details and pie charts and graphs and all this other stuff. And then kind of finding, all of these rare pictures. Because back in the early days, there was no cell phone to take pictures. You would bring a camera and take the pictures. And so you would develop the actual stills. So I have hundreds of those from the first 5 or 6 years of my career. And I just had to go find them and kind of, make this, like I said, a big collection of the career of Jericho. And that's kind of where it all started and how it became to be.
I think that's a really important point, though, because it's not like it's just you're buying a list of stuff. It's like there's stories, there's top 10 lists. Like one of the things I looked for straight away, I don't know why, but I have a real fond memory of musical chairs on Raw. I don't know why. And I was just like, I wonder how that's, and so stuff like that's in there as well. Was that important for you to kind of, cover stuff like that for geeks like me who might be like, is he going to talk about that? Is he going to bring that in there?
I don't remember how I discussed it, if I did discuss the book, because the idea is matches, right? Like I couldn't include every single appearance I ever had, because I didn't keep track of that. Yeah. It was just the matches that I had. And then I think maybe it appears in one of the...
Yeah, there's a little bit about it. Yeah, there's a little...
Okay, so I think maybe because the match, I believe, going back to it, was against Randy Orton that night, and probably talked about musical chairs. Because what I did too was... Alex was very instrumental in this. Alex would pull, obviously I can't write a description on every match, but I said, pull, 20 or 30 or 40 important moments, and I'll write paragraphs on those matches. And that's kind of what we did. So obviously the most memorable thing about that night in Winnipeg was the musical chair matches, or musical chair contest, which I won, by the way. Yeah. So, but the point is, you now know what date it was, and I could probably look it up if I had a couple seconds, because I believe it was in 2005 in the summertime, and I can find that type of information in here, and nobody else has that. And that's one thing I really liked about it. There's people like Tommy Dreamer's claim that he's done that, and then Frankie Kazarian says that he's done it too. But other than that, I mean, this would be like, and especially spanning the time frame of 1990 to 2020, just how much the business has changed. And this would be the equivalent of like if Shawn Michaels or Ric Flair or somebody did it. Just imagine the names that you would see. And that's the thing too. Like you can go in here and find out what was going on in CMLL at the time, or going on in WIR in New Japan, in Japan at the time, or in Germany when I went, and in Smoky Mountain, and all of that is included in here. So I just thought it was just, there's nothing left out. And as a result, you can go through this and learn so much, not just about me, but about wrestling in general.
Yeah, and even like, when you one of the ones that I noted down was like, so when you had the match with Rey Mysterio, which is match 2130, you talk about, you have to convince Vince McMahon about the finish of the match with the mask coming off. Like there's stories to stuff which I think adds a lot to, the different matches.
Yeah, and then that, once again, that's kind of the idea behind it. Like we weren't able to do every single match that way, but I would go through the pictures that we had and go through some of the matches that we were talking about, and just kind of see which ones would be relevant to tell certain stories about, and which ones would be relevant to it's one of the things I've been doing on the Saturday Night Special, where I ask people just to choose a number, and then I can tell stories about that number. Just by looking up the book. And just to tell you right now, it was July 5th, 2004. That was the night of the musical chairs, because I fought Randy Orton in Winnipeg. It was match number 1,734. I lost to a roll up, and I gave that match 4 stars.
There you go.
So, it's all in there, and I can tell you those stories just from this book. So once again, it's a lot of fun. And maybe to read it all the way through is kind of strange. If you look behind me, I have a Rush book right there. It's called Wandering the Face of the Earth. That has every single Rush gig ever, all the details about it and all the stories and the set lists. And obviously I'm not going to read it all the way through, but if I want to look at the Rush gigs that I saw, I can find them. And that's what a lot of people are doing with the Complete List of Jericho, looking up the matches that they were at and kind of seeing what's been said about them.
Yeah. What another match that I think is important to bring up that I was glad that was was in there obviously, and you talked about it being one of your favorites. Match 1284, you and Benoit against Triple H and Austin from that Raw in 2001. And like, I
Right.
watched that match recently, and like how some older matches you go, was it as good as I remember it being? It feels like it's better now than like
Yeah.
you remember it being. I mean, it's kind of the perfect book for you to be able to talk about that kind of match as well, because I know he doesn't get a lot of play. And it's good to see it's still one of your favorites, because it's one of my favorites.
Well, I mean, at one point it was voted the best Raw match of all time, and of course now it's got an asterisk to it because Benoit's in it. But take out, the personal side of things from a work side, it is one of the best matches of all time. It's one of the only times that I can recall where Steve Austin was legitimately a heel and had heel heat. And that night in San Jose, people were going crazy for it. And there's something big at stake of the tag team titles. And of course, these two huge mega stars fighting the young up and comers. The false finish was amazing. And of course, it becomes even more legendary with the fact that Triple H tore his quad during it. So it's kind of gone beyond just a match and gone to almost folklore at this point in time because of all the elements surrounding it,
Yeah.
And I agree. It is one of the greatest matches of all time. And I'm not saying that from an egotistical standpoint.
Mhm.
I'm saying that from just the circumstances surrounding it. Definitely one of the most talked about, like I said, has almost become, mythical in all of these different, things that happened, all these fruits that lined up to make it so. So when you go through and like you said, read that book and see it, and then I can talk about it a little bit more. I think it's in my top 10 favorite matches of all time. Which, once again, how do you choose 10 matches out of 2,722? It's not easy, but I did my best to do that.
And I bring this match up for no particular reason, Chris. It's just coincidence, but your match with Daniel Bryan on NXT in February 2010 is a match that I think a lot of people maybe forgot that happened, but that was such an interesting match. And I feel like that's what you're going to get with the book as well, is matches that you might not immediately remember as a Jericho favorite, but are intriguing to, look back at.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to have that match. I just thought, why is the WWE champion having a match against some guy that's just coming in for NXT? And I remember it was Undertaker that was like, go out there and show him why you're the champion. And I think it was a very short match. It was only 6 minutes. I remember Brian hit that tope and he kind of came out so fast. I didn't expect it. And he overshot and hit the desk. And had we been, had more time, we could have built the whole match just around that and changed it all on the fly, but we really didn't have the time to do that. And I don't think I wrestled Daniel many more times, maybe 2 or 3 times, but none of them memorable. That one was the one that was memorable, and who would have thought it at the time? But here we are, 10 years later, and people still talk about it because it was such a monumental match. And the first meeting between two guys that, are still doing it pretty much at the top of our games 10 years later. So, and like you said, had this book not been released, you might forget about those matches and not even remember it. So it's right there for all the world to see.